The horse stood at the edge of Caleb Warner's property like a ghost made flesh. Same chestnut mare, same worn saddle, same silver-trimmed bridle he'd buried alongside its rider 2 days ago in the Nevada desert. Except now the mare was here, alone, covered in dust and something darker. Caleb's hand moved slowly to the revolver at his hip. His breath caught in his throat, because the horse shouldn't be here, couldn't be here. He'd watched that animal run off into the Badlands after the man died, watched it disappear into the heat shimmer like it was fleeing the scene of something terrible, and now it had returned. The mare's reins dangled loose, its flanks trembled, and tied to the saddle horn, where there had been nothing before, was a leather satchel Caleb had never seen. "Jesus Christ," Caleb whispered. The horse took a step forward, then another. Its eyes locked on him with an intelligence that made his skin crawl. It knew something, or maybe it was bringing him a message from the man he'd buried in the sand. But before you understand why this horse haunts me, let me take you back 2 days to the moment I became a grave digger for a stranger. 48 hours earlier, Caleb Warner was doing what he'd done every day for the past 3 years, riding fence lines on his small Nevada cattle ranch, checking for breaks, fixing what the desert broke. He was 20 miles from his homestead when he saw the buzzards circling. At first, he thought it was a steer or maybe a coyote. The desert took everything eventually. Animals, dreams, men who thought they could tame it. But when Caleb rode closer, he saw the man. Face down in the sand, dark coat, black hat a few feet away, half buried by the wind. A chestnut mare standing nearby, reins dragging, refusing to leave its master. Caleb's hand moved slowly to the revolver at his hip. His breath caught in his throat. Because the horse shouldn't be here, couldn't be here. He'd watched that animal run off into the Badlands after the man died, watched it disappear into the heat shimmer like it was fleeing the scene of something terrible. And now it had returned. The mare's reins dangled loose, its flanks trembled, and tied to the saddle horn, where there had been nothing before, was a leather satchel Caleb had never seen. "Jesus Christ," Caleb whispered. The horse took a step forward, then another. Its eyes locked on him with an intelligence that made his skin crawl. It knew something, or maybe it was bringing him a message from the man he'd buried in the sand. But before you understand why this horse haunts me, let me take you back 2 days, to the moment I became a grave digger for a stranger. 48 hours earlier, Caleb Warner was doing what he'd done every day for the past 3 years, riding fence lines on his small Nevada cattle ranch, checking for breaks, fixing what the desert broke. He was 20 miles from his homestead when he saw the buzzards circling. At first, he thought it was a steer or maybe a coyote. The desert took everything eventually. Animals, dreams, men who thought they could tame it. But when Caleb rode closer, he saw the man. Face down in the sand, dark coat, black hat a few feet away, half buried by the wind. A chestnut mare standing nearby, reins dragging, refusing to leave its master. Caleb dismounted slowly. "Hey," he called out. "You all right?" Stupid question. The man wasn't moving. Caleb knelt beside the body and rolled it over. The man was maybe 40, with a weathered face and a bullet hole clean through his chest. Dead for hours, maybe since dawn. No identification, no papers, just a revolver still holstered at his hip and a silver pocket watch tucked in his vest. Caleb looked around. No tracks except the horses, no sign of a struggle, no indication of where the man had come from or who'd shot him. Just death in the desert, anonymous and absolute. "Well," Caleb muttered, "can't leave you for the buzzards." He spent the next hour digging a grave with his hands and a flat rock. The sand was stubborn, but Caleb was stubborn too. He wrapped the man in his own bedroll, lowered him into the shallow grave, and piled stones on top to keep the scavengers away. He spoke no words, didn't know what to say. When he was finished, he stood and wiped the sweat from his face. The chestnut mare watched him with dark, knowing eyes. "Go on," Caleb told the horse. "Get." The mare snorted once, tossed its head, and bolted into the desert. Caleb watched it go, then mounted his own horse and rode home. He told himself he'd done the decent thing. He told himself that was the end of it. He was wrong. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He kept seeing the man's face, pale, dust-covered, frozen in an expression that looked almost like surprise. He kept hearing the sound of sand falling on stone as he'd covered the grave, and he kept thinking about that horse, the way it had watched him, the way it hadn't run until Caleb told it to, like it was waiting for permission, or maybe waiting to see what Caleb would do. By sunrise, Caleb convinced himself he was being foolish. He'd buried a stranger. It happened out here. The frontier was full of unmarked graves and stories no one would ever know. He went about his work, feeding cattle, mending fences, boiling coffee that tasted like regret. But the unease stayed with him. On the second day, Caleb rode back to the grave. He told himself he just wanted to make sure the stones were still in place, that nothing had disturbed the burial. When he arrived, the grave was untouched, but there were tracks around it, fresh tracks, boot prints, human boot prints, circling the grave like someone had stood there for a long time, studying it, then walking away to the north, toward the mountains. Caleb's blood ran cold. He'd buried the man alone. There had been no one else for miles, and these tracks were fresh, made sometime between yesterday and this morning. Someone had found the grave. "Who are ya?" Caleb whispered to the wind. The desert gave no answer. He followed the tracks north for half a mile before they disappeared into hard rock. Whoever it was knew how to move without leaving a trail. Caleb rode home that evening with his hand on his revolver and his eyes on the horizon. That night he slept with his rifle across his lap, and the next morning the horse returned. Caleb approached the mare slowly, hand extended, voice low. "Easy now, easy." The horse didn't spook, didn't run, just stood there, trembling, waiting. Caleb's eyes went to the satchel tied to the saddle horn. It was weathered leather, buckled tight, with initials burned into the flap. J.M. He reached for it. The mare snorted but didn't move. Caleb unbuckled the satchel and opened it. Inside were three things: a stack of letters, at least 20, tied with string, all addressed to someone named Margaret Thornton in Carson City. A land deed for a silver mine called the Morning Star, signed by a man named James Mitchell.
and a photograph. A man and a woman standing in front of a small house. The man was the one Caleb had buried. The woman was young, smiling, holding his hand. Caleb's stomach twisted. James Mitchell. That was the dead man's name. And these letters, they were love letters. Caleb didn't read them, didn't need to, but he could see the desperation in the handwriting, the way the ink bled through the paper like the words had been written in tears. The last letter was dated 5 days ago. Margaret, I've found it. The vein runs deep. We'll be rich. I'll be home in 2 weeks. Wait for me. I love you. James. Caleb felt sick. This man hadn't been some drifter. He'd been someone's husband, someone's future. He'd struck silver and was riding home to tell the woman he loved when someone shot him. And now that someone, whoever they were, was looking for something. The deed. The mine. Caleb looked at the horse. Who did this to him? The mare's ears flicked back, and then Caleb heard it. Hoofbeats, coming fast from the north. 3 riders crested the ridge, hard men in dust-covered coats, guns visible, faces shadowed by wide-brimmed hats. They stopped 50 yards out. The lead rider, tall, gaunt, with a scar running down his left cheek, called out, "That's our horse." Caleb's hand moved to his revolver. Funny, horse seems to think otherwise. "We've been tracking it for 2 days, the man said. "Belongs to a man we did business with, name of Mitchell." "Mitchell's dead," Caleb said flatly. The rider's expression didn't change. "We know. We buried him." Liar. Caleb saw it in the way the man's hand rested too casually on his gun, in the way the other 2 riders spread out slightly, flanking. These were the men who'd killed James Mitchell. "If you buried him," Caleb said slowly, "then why'd I find him face down with a bullet in his chest?" The rider's smile was cold. "Because you're a better Christian than we are." Silence. "Now," the man continued, "we'll take that horse, and whatever's in that satchel." Caleb's jaw tightened. "No." "Son, you don't want to die over a dead man's belongings." "You're right, but I'll die before I let you steal what's his." The lead rider sighed. "Your choice." He reached for his gun, and Caleb pulled first. The shot cracked across the desert like thunder. The lead rider fell. The other 2 scattered, reaching for their weapons, but Caleb was already moving, diving behind a water trough, firing again, the chestnut mare bolting to safety. Gunfire erupted. Bullets splintered wood, dust exploded into the air, and in that moment, Caleb realized something. It wasn't about the mine. It wasn't about the money. It was about James Mitchell, a man who died alone in the desert trying to get home to the woman he loved. A man whose last hope was that someone, anyone, would finish what he started. And that someone was Caleb. He fired twice more. 1 man dropped, the 3rd turned and ran, riding hard back toward the mountains. Caleb didn't chase him. He just stood there, breathing hard, covered in dust and gunpowder, staring at the satchel lying in the dirt. 3 days later, Caleb Warner rode into Carson City. He found Margaret Thornton's address in the letters. She lived in a small house on the edge of town, with flower boxes in the windows and a white picket fence. Caleb knocked. The woman who answered was the same one from the photograph, except now her eyes were hollow and her hands trembled. "Yes?" she said. Caleb removed his hat. "Ma'am, my name's Caleb Warner. I have something that belongs to you." He handed her the satchel. Margaret opened it, saw the letters, saw the photograph, saw the deed. And then she understood. "James," she whispered. "I'm sorry, ma'am. He didn't make it home." Margaret's face crumpled, but she didn't cry, just held the satchel to her chest like it was all she had left. Did he suffer?" I thought of the bullet hole, the surprise on James Mitchell's face, the grave in the desert. "No, ma'am," I lied. "It was quick." Margaret nodded. "Thank you for bringing him back to me." Caleb didn't tell her about the men who'd tried to take the mine, didn't tell her about the gunfight, didn't tell her that her husband's horse had carried his memory back across the desert like some kind of miracle. He just tipped his hat and turned to leave. "Mr. Warner?" Margaret called after him. He stopped. "He would have liked you," she said softly. Caleb nodded and rode back into the desert, where the dead speak through the living and loyalty runs deeper than blood. If you felt the weight of this story here on Frontier Love Tools, make sure you subscribe, because out here on the frontier, every sunset hides another story waiting to be told. Stories of loyalty, loss, justice, and the bonds that survive even death. Hit that subscribe button, and let's ride into the next tale together.